Hey y'all, welcome to Listen to Leah. So yesterday I did an intro explaining what my podcast is about and that I'm going to try to post daily. I want to clarify because I will be posting on TikTok daily, but my YouTube channel will be twice a week. I'm not sure exactly like how I want to do that, but I want to start out with trying to post once on Monday and once on Fridays, doing like 20-30 minute episodes. But I do have two kids that I'm raising by myself, and I have a full-time job on top of it. So hopefully, that's how it works out, but it's not always that easy or that simple. But I will post every day on TikTok. Um, so today I want to start by explaining that domestic abuse or domestic violence is actually a cycle, and it is a cycle through generations, and it is a cycle or a pattern within the relationship itself. So I'm going to try to post the pictures so that you guys can see the chart for the relationship. If not, you can always just Google and I can link it. It's a domestic violence pattern within the relationship. So starting out talking about the cycle through generations, there's a saying that children learn what they live. Children live what they learn. I said that backwards. There's also a saying that states that children should do as their parents say, not as they do. And I don't necessarily agree with this because children will almost always emulate what they see, which is why they tell us to lead by example, right? So although as parents, we want our children to do as we say because we don't necessarily want them to follow in our footsteps, they're going to learn by the example that you set. They're going to learn by what they see, right? So this is obviously important in any kind of parenting dynamic because you always want the next generation to be better than yours. You want to be better than your parents and so on and so forth down the line, right? But because domestic violence is a pattern, it's important because your son, if you have a son, is going to emulate that role model, that male role model in his life, right? And not only that, but you are teaching him that this is okay, like this is the love that you deserve, and so he's going to think that it's okay to inflict that onto other women that he dates as he grows up. And not that I am wishing this on anybody or anything like that. These are just statistically, these are facts. If you have a daughter, I actually have a boy and a girl. So if you have a daughter, she is more likely to be in an abusive relationship. So we'll go back to that. I'm getting ahead of myself. But because domestic violence is a pattern, and through growing up, we swear that we're not going to become our parents, right? Like I know for me, I swore like this was never going to happen to me. But it is human nature, and this is also a psychology fact that you're going to follow and gravitate towards what feels familiar. So even if you feel like it's wrong, or you tell yourself like you don't want this kind of relationship or you don't want to do this, it feels naturally safe because that is how you grew up. So even if in like your early developmental years where you don't remember, it's forming like your subconscious. So let's say that for you as a child, and this is just, an if factor, a hypothetical. Let's say that your father was abusive to your mother while you were a baby or while she was pregnant with you, or, at an age that you couldn't remember before the age of 2 or 3, we'll say. So you're not going to remember that she left before that, but it forms like your subconscious, which does affect you mentally growing up. And again, you are statistically set to follow in that same type of relationships. So it's also important to be aware of our subconscious in wanting to fix our childhood. So if you did have a childhood where you grew up in a toxic, abusive environment, you will kind of, again, gravitate towards that even though you don't want to. And subconsciously, because you gravitated towards it, because it feels safe, you're going to try to fix that. So I know, just as an example, one of my siblings, and I'm not going to name any names here, once told me that he feels, this was years and years ago, that he's trying to fix the childhood that he had through his wife and children. which that relationship also became toxic. And then I noticed many years later that subconsciously I also tried to fix my childhood through certain relationships as well. So for me personally, I think that the violent side of a man, made me just feel safe. Every man that I knew from my childhood was violent, abusive, or aggressive in some way, shape, or form. Um, my father and mother were very toxic, and my father was physically, verbally abusive to her, and he even spent time in prison for what he did. And I will get into that at a later podcast. I did witness more than once my grandfather hitting my father's stepmother, who I also refer to as my grandma. And then when my mom did leave my father and got with my stepfather, he was verbally, I don't want to say abusive, but just not a kind man to grow up with. I feel like as a young girl, I can't speak for my brothers. We're not talking about parenting here, but I do feel that boys receive discipline a little bit differently than girls do. And then especially with that happening so fast, with her going from the relationship with my father, of it just being toxic like my whole life and abusive my whole life, and then maybe like 1 to 2 years of it being like on and off, where she's like trying to get away from him, but then we all know that the hold that they have on you, and then her going back and it being like back and forth, and then all of a sudden, she's now like with my stepfather and we're like moving in with him. So there was no kind of, for me, what I would consider like normality, I guess, if you want to call it that. That's probably not the best word. And then even like my uncles, because I do have a really big family. I never witnessed any of my uncles being like abusive to their girlfriends or wives or anything like that. But they were all just like really just aggressive men. Like I witnessed fights with other men, just loud, aggressive, like mean. So for me, I basically learned to equate violence and abuse with love. So then when men who were kind and sweet and genuine, I never ended up learning to have respect for them because I didn't view them as men, right? If that makes sense. I viewed them less than, based on how I had been conditioned, which obviously I know better now, but we can also revisit that at another time. So going back to the generational cycles or generational curses, as some people refer to it, as children, we do follow in our parents' footsteps. So I do want to say that if you're here today listening or watching and you're wanting to do better for yourself and your children or future children, if you don't have any, then I promise that you're on the right path. It's extremely hard to rewire your brain and your nervous system after going through trauma as a child and then yourself being in a traumatic relationship. And we can also talk about that in other episodes. Okay, so now that we know the psychology behind generational cycles, I'm going to talk about me and as I said on my introduction yesterday on January 11th, I'm the third generation that I know of, and my children are the fourth generation to experience domestic violence as children. So I'm doing all of this to stop the cycle now before they are adults, and to help those in need of breaking the cycle, because it's not talked about enough. There's not enough laws in place, and it's a very slippery slope to go down. This is going to be like the backstory, like my parents' early childhood, or like their parents, what happened with them, my grandparents. And I want to preface by saying that I place no judgment on any parties related to or involved in the events that I'm about to share. I'm not judging anybody. I wasn't even alive at the time. These are just stories that I've heard from other family members. And then I also want to say that there was a time that I did resent my mother for a few years due to certain choices that she did or didn't make. And for those of you in the same or similar situation, don't hate your mothers. She did the very best that she could do with what she knew at the time. And there was just little to almost no resources back in that day. And leaving a marriage for a woman was a lot harder back then than it is to do now. So just give her some grace, give her the same grace that you would like your children to give you. Okay, I just want to say that. So anyway, starting on my mother's side with my grandmother, so my mom's mom, my maternal grandmother, when she was in a relationship with my mother's father, it was a very toxic relationship, and this is according to my eldest aunt, so my mom's oldest sister, who would have been one of the only ones old enough to remember. So from what I've gathered, he was very controlling and extremely jealous. And I don't know that there was hitting, but there was shoving and grabbing of the arms. So that is considered physical abuse, but I don't know that it escalated to as far as hitting, meaning there's no witnesses to attest like if there was like slapping, punching, kicking, or anything like that. So an example of like the toxicity and like control and jealousy. So I was told that he once broke all of my grandmother's heels. Like he removed the heel like from the shoe, and then like he broke them like in half, like the heel off of the shoe, like into like the big kitchen sinks that they used to have back in the day. And then like proceeded to pour bleach all over them so that she couldn't get them fixed, because he didn't want her dressing a certain way or looking a certain way or getting any kind of like male attention, because she was really, really beautiful at that time. So obviously my mother doesn't remember any of this. Like I said, it was my aunt, her oldest sister that remembers. And I don't know about any of the other men that she was involved with, but there were several men in and out of my mother's life as a child. So it's my opinion, not my mother's opinion, but my opinion that her not having a strong, like stable male role model to show and guide and like show her how she should be treated, and then like also to treat her mother for her to like emulate that, which I talked about in my last video, probably led her to be in a relationship like the toxic relationship that she was in with my father. She was 14, 15 years old when she met my father. My father is a year older than her, for context. So that is my opinion based on like psychological facts and just what I believe, okay? So now going into my father's childhood and background. So my paternal grandfather was physically and verbally abusive to my maternal grandmother, so my dad's dad and his mom. My grandma left when my dad, my father, and his aunt were around like the age of 7, I'd say. Both of my paternal grandparents remarried, so my grandma and my grandpa both remarried other people. My grandmother ended up being in another abusive relationship within her second marriage. So when my dad turned 16, he beat his stepfather with a bike chain, because he hit my grandmother in the face and cut her face open. And then my paternal grandfather also abused his second wife, twice that I was a witness to as a child under the age of 14. Okay, so if I had witnessed that, then my father witnessed 3 sets of abuse as a child. Okay, he witnessed his mother and father, and then like their new relationships when they each remarried. So explaining that every male role model he had was abusive, you know, leading him to be the way that he was to my mother. So not that that's an excuse at all, but just showing like how psychology and how our childhood shapes us, right? So I do want to talk about this movie. It's on Prime. It's called The Cycle. It's not like a top rated film, or it's more like a B movie. It's not like great actors, but you get the point of the movie, and it is like a really great watch. So basically in the beginning of the movie, it's like set, I want to say like in the 70s or 80s. And the couple, they have a young boy and girl, I want to say like around the age of 8. And they end up, he's drinking and his friends are over, and she basically asks him nicely like to come have dinner or something, and he freaks out at her like he's the man and he can do whatever he wants, it's his house, blah blah blah. And his friends end up leaving, and they get into a fight, and he ends up like hitting her, like making her face bleed, and the kids, their son and daughter, are watching from like the steps, like through like the railing, right on the banister. And then it like fast forwards to, I want to say like the 90s, and the boy and the girl from that house are now grown with their own children. So the girl, she is sitting talking with the sister-in-law, so her brother's wife, the boy from the first house, and she has like a huge black eye, and the sister-in-law is telling her like, she needs to leave him, and she's like, but I love him, like we all say, and she's like, like you need to get a plan, and yada yada. And like the husband comes home, the brother of the one with the black eye, and he like freaks out and how he's gonna beat him up and blah blah blah. And then she takes her daughter and she leaves, and the other couple, the brother and his wife, they have a boy and a girl also, who I want to say are like around the age of 8 or 9 also. So she can tell he's like stressed out, and she's telling him, like I can get a job, like I don't mind. And he's like, no, like I'm a man, like I want to be able to take care of my family, blah, blah, blah. And she's just trying, to calm him down. He ends up going into one of the drawers, and he finds like a checkbook in her name and like a pamphlet to an apartment complex. So obviously she's trying to make a plan to leave, like she was just telling her sister-in-law to do, right? So you can see that like it's kind of hypocritical, because these men will always be mad at other men for hurting their family, but don't realize like that they need to change. So anyways, they start fighting. He becomes aggressive. He's hitting her, choking her. He ends up body slamming her, I think, onto like the coffee table, and he kills her. So at the end of the movie, I don't want to tell you the rest of the movie, but at the end of the movie, those 3 kids are now grown, right? Because those 2 went to go live with their aunt. And so they opened up like this domestic violence, like help center, like to counsel men, who are abusers. So they go visit their father, who's in prison, obviously, because he killed their mother. And they ask him, like, how could you do that? Like, why would you do that? And he says, like, I loved your mother, but I just didn't know how to love. Like, I didn't know how to show love because of how I was raised. And that is the cycle, explained the cycle of what I'm talking about, because you don't know. You live what you learn. So my point is to teach your children to do better and to break the cycle.